BookTube. I have another tag for you today, and we're going to make an attempt to try and catch up with some of the tags that I have missed, whether I've been tagged in them or not. Following along a sentiment that was conveyed by Sean the Book Maniac a while ago, that if you see a tag that you want to do, you should do it by all means. Don't wait to be tagged. There's an element of exclusion there that I'm sure nobody here wants. But anyway, in this case, I was tagged. This is the Somewhat Autobiographical Tag by Mark at BookTime with Elvis. And I believe he tagged me in the original tag. And it's another, as the title suggests, very personal, very autobiographical tag. I love those. So we're gonna get right to it here. Number one. What was the number one best-selling book, fiction and or nonfiction, on the day you were born? And have you read these books? I've got my iPad right here, just in case you wonder what I'm looking at. And when we are turning to the day I was born, we are turning more specifically to the year I was born, which is 1993. So we're going to, I said, which is 1993. So we're going to turn to some of the books from 1993, the year I was born. So what have we got here? I had to go look on Wikipedia, of course, because I have no idea what came out in 1993. And I found a long list of books that are noteworthy in one way or another. I thought I'd go through some of them in case you see them in your used bookstore. Number one is Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. It's a black and white graphic novel in which he breaks down sequential artwork in the Western world. Western sequential artwork. And you might think, okay, well, that's very simple. It's very didactic. It won't be very interesting. But, oh my, Understanding Comics is incredible. Absolutely incredible. You'll see once you get 10 pages into it, you will see what I mean. It's not just a simple, straightforward breakdown of how you do this thing. There's much more to it than that. Then there's Elizabeth Marshall's The Hidden Life of Dogs. It's a bit of a bestseller in 1993, I have heard. It doesn't really portray the hidden life of dogs, but it does really highlight what a crappy dog owner Elizabeth Marshall is. So I was furious while I was reading it, but then that fury is common for me when it comes to books written by humans about dogs. There's only one two-legged creature anywhere in the world who's actually qualified to write a book about dogs, and you're looking at him, and he's never done it. We have a couple of loathsome books that, despite the fact that the year is 1993, these books were aimed very much at the Donald Trump base. The thing, this sort of inarticulate, rumbling mass of people who, after 2016, just became referred to in shorthand as the base. That base has always existed, and it existed back in 1993 when Donald Trump was failing at other things instead of failing at being U.S. president. And a couple of the books from that year are Private Parts by Howard Stern, which sold unbelievably well. Just unbelievably well. One of the only books, new releases, of that year or even that decade, where the boxes with 12 copies of the hardcover in it, the boxes would be brought out onto the sales floor so that a clerk could open the box and put the books on the shelf, and the customers would be taking the book from the box to the register, so that a box would be brought out onto the sales floor and an empty box would go back to the stockroom without a single book having gone on the shelves. It was all just immediately consumed by customers. But also See, I Told You So by Rush Limbaugh, the late and not at all lamented Rush Limbaugh, who wrote a series of these bloated books about how we all know what America is and should be. No social safety net, scorn for the poor, and no people who aren't white. Absolutely not. Come on, we all know this. Come on, guys, we all know this. Unfortunately, they were all part of that year, but also lovely stuff like Stella Luna by Janelle Cannon, a children's book that came out in 1993 about a little bat who goes off course and gets lost and suddenly finds a whole new world. Stella Luna became a bit of a phenomenon. There was the normal kids illustrated book, and then there was a little version, and then there was a board book, and there were stuffed animals. It was a big deal in its time. But what else have we got here? Days of Grace by the great Arthur Ashe, which was billed as a tennis memoir. He was a great tennis player. But the book ended up being much more than that. The book is, I forget who the name of his co-writer is, but the book ended up being about a lot more than just tennis. It was terrific, moving, in a way that sometimes these ghost-written sports autobiographies can be, if the right tone is started from the beginning, and it was in this case. But what else we got? Oh, speaking of ghost-written, oh my. Someone tell Martine that there's a publisher's sweepstakes guy at the front door offering her the potential for $1 million. Get Martine out of the room so that I can mention The Downing Street Years by Margaret Thatcher, which is a book I'm sure you've seen. It's a big doorstopper thing about her time in power. She was helped to write it, but her voice is prominent all throughout, and it is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. In a way that maybe Ronald Reagan's An American Life is not. The closest equivalent that I can think of is My Life by Bill Clinton. Also heavily ghostwritten, also heavily imprinted with the voice and personality of the subject. The Downing Street Years is actually worth reading, very much so. And now Martine can come back in the room now that I've said that. What else here? Oh, The Radicalism of the American Revolution by Gordon Wood, one of our preeminent living American Revolution historians. This is a terrific book that goes a long way towards reminding us that when the founding fathers of America said that they pledged their lives and their sacred honors, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors to the cause, we are so accustomed, we're so complacent that we tend to forget that was literal. They meant that literally. And it's a wonderful book to remind you of it. There's Trainspotting by Irvin Welsh, weird novel that I could not completely dismiss at the time, and I still can't, even though I think I see through all of its gimmicks now. But the next book is also fiction, and I haven't got to the bottom of it. I love it, and I love rereading it. It's A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. Great, enormous chunk of a thing. Wonderfully done. Just wonderfully done. Worth a reread. Worth a read-along if I could find hardy enough souls to go through it. But on the other side of the length spectrum, but also a keeper, also very, very good, is The Giver by Lois Lowry from 1993. What we would call it YA, I guess you would have called it that back in 1993, but as is true with the best of YA, it's pitched towards anybody. Instead of pitched down, instead of, A Court of Mist and Fury and Ruby and Flame and whatnot, where it's a court of, it's a kingdom of X and Y, it's a court of X and Y, it's a trial of X and Y, and the X and Y are never ideologies. They are always two boys, and the two boys are always slightly different. One is more buttoned up, one is more of a bad boy. Both are gorgeous, and everything depends on who you date. Needless to say, The Giver is not like that, and I highly recommend it. And I recommend the P. Craig Russell graphic novel. There was a P. Craig Russell visual adaptation in graphic novel form of The Giver that was really, really good. And I also recommend the movie. I know, it's a little strange, but I do. I very much recommend the movie with Jeff Bridges and Meryl Streep, and the main character played by Brenton Thwaites. Brenton Thwaites always sounds like somebody is setting you up for a speech impediment joke, but he's actually just a young tobacco addict himbo star who does a wonderful job in that movie. Really about as good a job as you could do in that role. And who's probably more famous to a lot of you as starring as Robin in the straight-to-cable Teen Titans series. Anyway, what else we got here? Yes, The Night Manager by John le Carré. In 1993, a whole bunch of Titanic figures were still writing. Patrick O'Brien was still writing in 1993. Clarissa Oakes came out in 1993, but not under the title Clarissa Oakes in the United States. But The Night Manager came out by John le Carré, and it's quite good. A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest Gaines. Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks. The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. A Dead Man in Deptford by Anthony Burgess came out in 1993. His last novel, I think, certainly one of his last ones. I'm pretty sure Burgess died in 93. And as you can tell from the title, it's a historical novel about Christopher Marlowe, and it's terrific. It's really good. Burgess gave the lie to a lot in his creative life. One of the things that he used to mock, he used to poke fun at E.M. Forster ruining it for everybody else by making it look like if you were a serious artist, you would write 8 serious books and then die, and that if you weren't serious, you'd write all the time. Burgess, of course, wrote all the time, but he gave the lie to that because so many of his books are so much worth reading. And he also gave the lie to the idea of late style that was put forward by his intellectual sparring partner, Edward Said, and a whole bunch of other people, that there was a noticeable late style and that it was thinner, weaker, but maybe a little more graceful. And nothing that Burgess ever wrote was thin or weak or graceful. So Dead Man and Deptford just gives a lie to all of it. It is really, really good. Burgess was uncomfortably aware of a writer named George Garrett, who is now long forgotten. No one reprints him. No one reads him. He is absolutely terrific, and he wrote historical fiction, and he wrote a historical novel about Christopher Marlowe called Enter from the Sun. Burgess knew perfectly well. I think he probably reviewed it somewhere. He knew perfectly well that Enter from the Sun was a better historical novel about Christopher Marlowe than he could write on his best day, much less when he was dying of lung cancer and coughing up blood for 4 hours out of every day. Nevertheless, Dead Man and Deptford is terrific. What else we got? What you got here? I promised I wouldn't digress too much, and yet I'm doing that. Well, 28-year-olds will do that. Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose. The Bridges of Madison County by Robert James Waller, which sold like the dickens in 1993. Just sold incredibly well. And once again, was made into a movie that was a whole lot better than the threadbare little ditty of a book. The book is a Hallmark card. And the movie is much better than that. Robert Redford gives a fantastic performance in that movie. And then we can round off with The Client by John Grisham, because you got to keep Bill Rutenberg happy. So The Client by John Grisham came out in 1993. So those were some of the books that were bestsellers and notable releases in the year that I was born. I will just move on. Question number 2. What are some books, series, or standalone that immediately spring to mind when you think of your childhood? None do. My childhood was entirely full of playmates who did not read. They did not read, and they could not read, and they didn't miss it. So we'll just have to move straight on. Number 3, school days are the best days of your life. Apparently, I've never understood that. Never. But there you were forced to read some books you maybe wouldn't have chosen for yourself. Which did you enjoy? I have never been forced to read a book that I enjoyed. Even the ones that I come back to later and reread and do enjoy, I didn't enjoy at the time, because I just hate the experience of being told, here is a book, you must read 60 pages of it by next week, at which point I'm going to give you a quiz, partly on the book and partly on mine, your teacher's interpretation of the book. I want you not only to know what's happening in the book and be able to parrot it back, but I want you to be able to parrot back my interpretation of it, which will perforce become yours. Never, it's never happened. So let's see. Number 4, were you independent or part of a pack at school? Did you join in the reading fads of the day or do your own thing? Depends on what you mean by school. In the earliest possible years of school, I was literally the member of a pack. I didn't join in with stupid primates in any way. And if you get to college, nobody read in college except what they were forced to read. By the time I got to college, I had my earliest possible illustration of a fact that has cropped up often on this channel, which is that nobody reads. Nobody reads. Nobody cares about it. It's easy to get the opposite impression here in this little corner of BookTube, where it's all we think about, all we eat, sleep, and breathe. But in the larger world, if you're a zillennial, you have never ventured into the outer world, and you don't have any plans to. But if you're any other age group, you will have ventured out into the outer world, and you will know. It's not that people scorn it or dislike it, it's that it's totally absent from their life. They don't want to do it in any way, would rather die than read a book. And by the time I got to college, I realized when you're not, okay, you talk well, you think and reason well, but when you're not being forced to read something, you don't read at all. And in years after that, I saw that it was the same thing. So I did my own thing, I guess, is my short way of saying it. Question number 5 is, as you moved into your turbulent teens, can you remember your first experience encountering sex in a book? It's not possible to encounter sex in a book. It's only impossible to encounter very bad writing about sex in a book. If we could actually encounter sex in a book, then reading wouldn't be despised in the world. It'd be the most popular thing imaginable. Right now, the number of so-called serious readers, the number of people who take reading serious, who passionately love it, is about, I would say, 100,000. About 100,000 people, such readers, in the world, in the whole world, out of 9 billion, about 100,000 people. I think a really big stadium in Dubai, that's about as much as you could fill with the real, genuine, passionate readers in the world. If the other, 8.888 billion people in the world thought you could get sex in a book, then those numbers would be very different. But they're not. I've only encountered terrible writing about sex in books, and I've never encountered anything else. It's not possible, in my opinion, to write about sex well. So let's just move on. Let's see if we can find a better question here. Number 6, what were some of the first kinds of nonfiction you encountered? I was thinking about this. With fiction, I know right away, but I think the earliest kinds of nonfiction that I encountered were probably nature guides, birding guides, mammal guides, track guides, things like that, which isn't much of an encounter with nonfiction, but some of those books do have passionate prose in them. I'm thinking it's probably that. Let's see here. Question number 7. Whose bookshelf was more fun to raid, Mom's or Dad's? I know it's disappointing here and a little bit loudish, but I'm going to have to say neither. My father was a stern man. I know, looking back in my memories, I know that was more affect than reality. I think that was probably something that he wasn't aware of. It certainly wasn't aware of how strong it was. I think probably inside he was a very gregarious and chatty guy. He had just adopted in the course of a lifetime, tempered by war and by employment in the public sector and the private sector, he had adopted this kind of stern exterior. And as his child, I never saw anything else. So he had a collection of books. I don't know that it was a bookshelf, but I would never have rated it under any circumstances. Unfortunately, most of the time that he died a long time ago, when I was barely adult at all. And unfortunately, that didn't overlap with me being a passionate reader. So I wouldn't have had any motivation to. I think it would have, knowing what I remember about him, I think it would have pleased him enormously. If that had been reversed, if he had known that I was going to be a passionate reader, I think that would have pleased him enormously. And if he could somehow know that in addition to being a passionate reader, I also write for newspapers, which is something that he did, and that none of his other children did, I think that would have overjoyed him. I think that, I imagine an alternate reality in which he lived to 100, and we had decades as not father and son, but friends. And I imagine that being the source of innumerable long and fun conversations, is that we would suddenly have memories of the same profession. That would be amazing. And me sainted Ma did not read at all. She carried a book around with her all the time in her pocketbook. An aerodynamically balanced book that was designed to combat her mortal nemesis, bees. She had a mortal hatred of bees, and carried with her every day of her life in her pocketbook a bee book, which was only there because of its weight and heft, not because she was going to read it. When asked, why don't you read, she would say, I'm saving my eyes. And towards the end of her life, I said, well, Ma, what are you saving them for? The organ donation bank? And she said, that's your mother you're talking to, So she wasn't a reader at all. So I wouldn't have rated either one. I know it's a dumb dodge, but nevertheless true. Then number 8 is, how diverse is your library? I saw the question, and I was immediately ready to pounce. Poor Mark. I was immediately ready to attack the whole tag, because the 21st century censorship-based performative blue checkmark SJW diversity bothers me more with every passing year. With every passing year, I see more clearly what it wants. Not what it's advocating or claims it's advocating, but what it actually wants. And what it wants is the worst kind of fascism, to be resisted at all costs. But it turns out that that is not the kind of diversity that's being talked about here. Instead, it's the actual meaning of the word. It's what kinds of genres are represented among your books. And the tag actually helpfully lists a bunch of genres. So I thought we'd go through them. Antique, rare, and collectible. In other words, books about that. I don't have any. Arts and photography. I have a handful. I would say right now probably about 30 art books. No photography books. Except for one thick brick photography collection of classic dog photos. Biography, I have an enormous number of biographies. Business, law, and finance, very few, almost none. Calendars, diaries, and annuals, almost none. Children's books, I have quite a few. They're not all together. I noticed that just the other day. My children's picture books are scattered everywhere here. Mainly by virtue of the size of the shelf. Because they tend to be taller. Sorry, I'm getting a very dry throat here. I'm going to try and push through the end here. Comics and graphic novels, I have quite a few. A whole shelf full. Computing and the internet, almost nothing. Except for a handful of books on the social impact of the internet. And I imagine there are going to be more of those as time goes on. Crafts, hobbies, and home reference, none. The closest I come is, what was her name? Cheryl Mendelson. What was the name of the woman who did Home Comforts? It was a big book called Home Comforts. It also was a bit of an unexpected bestseller at the bookstore. All about the different things that go on in a home economy, the different realities that go on in a home reality, what lives in your walls, how the washing is done, how the air circulates. I thought Home Comforts was fascinating, but I don't even have a copy. I don't have anything else. This is fun, though. I hope a lot of you do this. Let's see here. Where did I leave off? All right, crime, thrillers, and mystery. I have quite a few. Quite a bit of those. Education, studies, and teaching. Almost nothing. Erotica. None. Fiction. I have quite a bit of fiction, all spanning 1,000 years. Food and drink. Very little. Very, very little. I don't have any Elizabeth David. I have Kitchen Confidential by Tony Bourdain. I don't have at the moment any MFK Fisher, because I keep waiting for there was a beautiful trade paperback called The Art of Eating that's the MFK Fisher volume that I want. I keep waiting to find it secondhand, and I just never have. So very little there. Foreign language study and reference, none. Health, family, and lifestyle, none. History, quite a bit of history, quite a bit. Horror, almost none. Humor, I have a large shelf of humor cartoon collections, The New Yorker and also other cartoonists. LGBTQ plus books. I'm assuming this means gay. The Q in LGBTQ is questioning. The plus is two-spirit, intersex, asexual, things that, statistically speaking, virtually do not exist. Things that are in the rest of the alphabet there are things in there that are immediate, concerning, serious medical problems. They are not identities. They don't get their own stripe on a flag on Pride Day. So I resist the terminology, but I think I know what's meant. I think it's gay and lesbian books, and I do have some of those. They're all fiction. I think I have a couple of nonfiction collections. What was that the one from last year about American Deviant? James Davison's book, The Greeks and Greek Love. I have a handful of those. Not much, though. Not as many as you might expect. Mind, body, and spirit, none. Go out for a walk, get a dog, eat vegetables. Okay? You don't have any chakras. Music, stage, and screen, very little unless we count as music biographies of great musicians. I have a few of those. Poetry, drama, and criticism. I have some poetry, I have a little bit of drama, and I have a whole bookcase, floor to ceiling, of criticism. Not literary criticism, not formal literary criticism, but my field. Book reviews, book essays, writing designed to talk about books rather than to push a theory. I have a whole bookcase, floor to ceiling, with those. And there's almost no room on it. I just moved those books there because there was no room on the bookcase they were on before. And they're already outgrowing that section, so I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll come up with something. Politics, philosophy, and social sciences. What a combo. I have some politics books, a handful of them. I don't have any philosophy. I don't have any social sciences either. Reference, I have almost no reference works unless they are readable as works of literature as well. So, for instance, the Oxford History of the Ancient World, it's multi-volumes, and it's been updated a few times. Some of those earlier volumes are very well written. They're very nice. I suppose in their day they would have been considered works of reference, and I might have something like that. But the old style thing, I used to have a little bookcase about hip high. I had 3 deep shelves, and it was full of reference works. Full of them. There was Chapman, the Chapman Guide to Sailing, and knots and nautical terms and whatnot. There was the Chambers Biographical Dictionary. There was the Macmillan Visual Dictionary. There was the American Heritage 4th edition Dictionary of the English Language, and also a little paperback American Heritage. There were a whole bunch of things. I had Bartlett's Familiar Quotations. I had a couple of other familiar quotations. I had poetic quotation books. Just a solid little library of reference works. And if you had met me, this was before the internet. This is the whole point of my answer here, is that this was before the internet. If you had somehow met me then, and there'd been a whole room of books, wall-to-ceiling bookcases everywhere, and a desk with a typewriter on it, and a stack of paper, and right next to the desk, that little 3-shelf bookcase of reference works. If you'd have met me and, we'd have shared some wine, and you'd have said, so out of all these books, which ones would you save if you had to save? If you had only an hour. Guests would always look at the biographies or the books on dogs or something like that, and the answer was always that reference. That reference library was the most important thing, because that was what I needed to work. And I don't have any of that anymore. None of it. Every once in a while, I'll see books like that at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, and my heart goes out to them. But I would never buy one. Why would I buy one? All of that stuff is at my fingertips. Literally at my fingertips. Anytime I need it. And updated. And cross-referenceable. No. Reference books are dead. I don't have any need for them. No one has any need for them. So I don't have any. Religion and spirituality, I have quite a bit. Especially in terms of the history of religion. Romance, I have a whole bookcase of romance novels. There are a couple of bookcases here where the whole bookcase is dedicated to one kind of writing. Romance is one. The books on books and writing, book criticism is one. Biography is one. School books. I think this might mean books you had from school. I don't have any. Why would I? I don't have any. And I shouldn't mock, because I know lots of young weightlifters, young fitness instructors or dude bros or whatnot, who their school books are the only books that you'll see when they lovingly Instagram their beautiful home. Off to one side in a despised little corner, you'll see a tiny collection of school books, and that's what they are. So I guess that's sorry, the beans being very melodramatic. I guess that's what's mean here, but I have none. Science fiction and fantasy, I have a whole bookcase full of science fiction and fantasy. Science, nature, and math, I have some of all of those. I have some science, I have plenty of nature, but I have a couple of math things. A couple of books on math that have actually managed not to alienate me. Scientific, technical, and medical. Popular science, but nothing else. Sports, hobbies, and games. Hobbies and games, no. Sports only, again, like with music, if it's a biography of a sports figure. Travel and holiday, I don't have any holiday books, but I have a small collection of travel books. I could stand to have a lot more, especially travel books that were written 100 years ago, that were written before air travel became just the way to do it, and also before booked tours and fat American tourists saturating every single little corner of the Piedmont. There was a glut of travel writing during the heyday of ocean liners, when travel could be done relatively cheaply, relatively easily, and you had to be up for a lot of hardship and adventure to travel inland in Morocco or something like that. And there were a glut of such books. They show up at the Brattle Bookshelf. I could stand to have a lot more of those, but I have a sprinkling here. Then university textbooks, same thing as school books. I don't have any university textbooks. And then young adult. I have a handful of young adult. Not nearly as many as the 100,000 subscriber booktubers who have nothing else, but some. Not there's more every year that I like, but I have some. Oh, we're going long here. Let's keep. The problem is that there are too many questions in the tag. Number 9. What types of books do you find difficult to discuss? None. Big surprise. Number 10. In what way do your life experiences and emotions shape your choice of reading? Very connected with Are You a Mood Reader? With the Mood Reader tag that's currently making the rounds on BookTube. Usually for me, not much at all. I'm more guided by the release dates of the books in question. Number 11, in much the same way as our taste in food changes, so perhaps does our taste in books. How would you say your own reading tastes have evolved over the decades? Towards more complexity, I think. I like it when I increasingly like it when an author respects my intelligence. Used to be they all did. Then they stopped, and probably justifiably so. But every once in a while, one still will, and I like that. Number 12, unfortunately, we all feel down at certain times. Have you got a book to go to raise you back up? I have some feel-good books, but really, like I mentioned yesterday, really, if I'm feeling a little tetchy, a little out of sorts, just engaging with any book will do it. Will do the trick. And there'll always be a new book. There'll always be something. There's another thing on the work pile right away to engage with. So it doesn't have to be one particular thing. Number 13, if you have to choose one book or author to represent each decade of your life, who or what would they be? The books should be ones you've read in that decade, not necessarily published in that decade. And for me, we're talking 3 decades. We're talking 3 decades for me. So for the 1990s, it would be Angels in America, Millennium Approaches. Tony Kushner won the Pulitzer Prize. It's part of his Angels in America, and it is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm going to choose that over even prose. Then in the 2000s, it would be Hilary Mantel, Wolf Hall. Not The Life of Pi. Not The Corrections, but Hilary Mantel. And then in the 2020s have Jenny Offal, they have Garth Greenwell, Atesha Moshfegh, Emma Klein. The 2020s are largely a lost cause. And those are the 3 decades of my life. Number 14, of course, everyone is entitled to their own opinions. Not really. It's my opinions you should worry about. Okay? But how do you feel when people say reading is boring? What would you say in defense of reading? People tell me that reading is boring. I change the subject because there's no way that you're going to do anything. You're never going to change somebody's mind by telling them they're wrong. You have to change their mind by example. And I've had that happen. I have spent time with corn-fed Iowa football fans who thought reading was boring until they saw how much I loved it, and heard when I happen to talk about it how enthused I get, and they became curious to try it out, and some of them became readers. So that's the only way. I wouldn't make a defense. And then number 15, what is the number 1 best-selling book on the day of your most recent birthday, fiction or nonfiction? Have you read them? And as luck would have it, I have 4 annual birthdays to maximize your gift-giving convenience. And my spring birthday is upon us. It is tomorrow, the 15th. So that would mean that the best-selling books are Clara and the Sun by Ishiguro, which I read and am not all that impressed by. The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, which I thought was a weird misstep. I think there was hardly anything in that book that works right. And this is an author that sometimes does usually work right. So I don't know what's going on there. Then A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah Maas, which was bad, just boring, pandering. Philip Roth, Blake Bailey's big biography of Philip Roth, is, I think, still lodged on the bestseller list. It's an official authorized biography, and the author spent years in Roth's company. And it's everything, unfortunately, that you would expect from that. It's an exonerating piece of extended hero worship. I reviewed it for the Christian Science Monitor, and a very good freelancer reviewed it for me for Big Canoe News in Northern Georgia. I'll try to, if I remember, I'll leave a link to both of those. Let's see here. The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman is also on the bestseller list tomorrow, on the day of my birth. I've read it, and it is spirited and very enjoyable. Unfortunately for me, it is permanently linked with the scandals of its publication in other languages. Its Dutch publisher was fired because the skin color didn't match Amanda Gorman's skin color, explicitly racist reasons. The Catalan translator was fired for explicitly racist reasons. And unlike the Dutch translator, the Catalan translator had lots of experience at translating and had finished his translation and handed it in, and then been told, hit the bricks. We have a quota to fill. Disgraceful. I'm not saying any of that was Amanda Gorman's call. I'm not saying that maybe I don't know her at all. I don't know anything about her. I'm not sure that, I don't know if she's happy with it at all. But one way or another, it's scandalous. Absolutely scandalous that in 2021, openly expressed racism has just returned to the public square. So it's going to be hard for me to think about that book without thinking of that scandal. And for all I know, the scandal's not over. And then the final book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates, which I'm pretty sure is still a bestseller, and which I reviewed for the Christian Science Monitor, and which a reviewer of mine, a freelancer of mine, reviewed at Big Canoe News. Again, I'll try to remember to leave links to both of them if they're up. I very much did not like the book at all. I very much did not like it. But it was just screaming unbelievable hypocrisy. So I'm, the less said, the better about it. But there you go. Huh? That is the Somewhat Autobiographical Tag. Sorry it took so long. Good Lord. This was a long video. That was unintended. But I urge you all to do this. It's a ton of fun. I'm going to wrap this up before I go any longer. But I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.